General Jeff Sessions earlier this week in the border state of Arizona, promising to amplify the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. Sessions called on federal lawyers to prioritize criminal immigration cases, defended the proposed border wall, and pledged to add 125 additional immigration judges in the next year. We also learned this week that Sessions has dissolved the department's independent commission on forensic science, an Obama-era initiative to review how evidence is used in criminal courts and to cut down on the kinds of wrongful convictions that often send innocent people to prison. As I said before, while many of the Trump administration's initial goals have stalled, the Sessions Justice Department has been racking up almost weekly successes in its attempt to roll back the civil rights advances of the last 8 years, if not the last 50 years. Joining me now is Christian Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Association for Civil Rights, and MSNBC contributor and attorney Raul Reyes. Thank you both for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christian, let me go to you. You work with me and around 5 or 6 of the major civil rights organizations, and part of our fear, part of our contention, even in our meeting with Attorney General Sessions, is that we're not talking about just the Obama years. They are striking at things that will, in many ways, turn back what has been achieved in civil rights over the last 50 years. Share your feelings on that.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions is clearly at war with civil rights and seems to be trying to turn the clock back in every respect. Whether you're talking about voting rights or important advances that have been made to promote policing reform across our country, or speaking up on the spike in hate crimes that we've seen around the nation, Jeff Sessions is making clear that he is no friend when it comes to civil rights. And so we are at war with this Justice Department. We need a Justice Department that is prepared to do its job and enforce our nation's federal civil rights laws.
Now, Raul, the whole announcement this week, him going down and making the statements that he made and really rolling back what had started under the Obama administration in some areas and even beyond. This was a very definitive move in terms of immigration rights and in terms of civil rights of people that are immigrants in this country.
Right, and one way we should look at this, I mean, Attorney General Sessions was correct when he said this is a new era, and it is in immigration enforcement, and that should trouble many Americans, because look at what he's doing down there. He's there on the border. They're talking about there's drugs and cartels and this out-of-control violence, but that's not the reality along the border. The illegal apprehensions on the border are at 40-year lows. The Border Patrol more militarized than ever. Border cities are very safe. So we have to wonder, why is he continuing to push this narrative? And the reason is to help instill in people's minds that immigrants are dangerous, that they're violent criminals. And this is the very chilling part, that lays the groundwork for more and more American people to accept the coming deportation force. These mass deportations that we're seeing DHS memos and other plans taking shape, reported everywhere from New York Times to Washington Post, by Jeff Sessions continually pushing this narrative, which Donald Trump, as we know from day one, has pursued. This, I think, there's a danger.
So this is not the end. This is the beginning.
This is the beginning to put people's minds like, yeah, all these undocumented people are out to get us. They're undermining our society. They're a threat. So when the deportations start happening, there will be a certain segment of the population, unfortunately, that goes along with it.
Christian, one of the things we saw this week, that with all of the drama that the Trump administration throws at us, is Judge Neil Gorsuch was sworn into the Supreme Court. And you in the Lawyers Committee, as well as other colleagues like Legal Defense Fund, you did extensive studies on why you oppose Gorsuch. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is that Gorsuch replaces Scalia, but if they get one more vote, the court tilts 5-4 to the right, which could really undermine voting rights and immigration rights and Affordable Care Act and women's right to choose. I mean, we're on the brink of them erasing the last half century. We're talking about back to Dr. King and Thurgood Marshall, things that was put on the law books. We're at the brink of that right now. We're one seat away from that being in real jeopardy.
It does feel that we are on the brink of a constitutional crisis in our country, and we should view the recent sitting of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court alongside what's happening at the Justice Department. We have an Attorney General who is not prepared to carry out his obligation and duty to confront civil rights problems where they exist and to bring civil rights cases where necessary. And at the same time, we now have Neil Gorsuch, who has completed his first full week on the U.S. Supreme Court. And there are incredibly important cases that will be going before the court that are pending for review, including an appeal concerning the North Carolina monster voter suppression law.
Right.
I'm very concerned about the changes that we're seeing. When the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law reviewed Neil Gorsuch's record, we did not find evidence that suggests he brings a strong commitment to fairly interpreting and applying the Constitution or fairly interpreting and applying federal civil rights laws. So when you don't have the Justice Department to turn to, or a Supreme Court that is not fully staffed and prepared to fairly carry out civil rights laws and hear the cases that come before it, it presents cause for concern.
Raul?
Well, to lay it out in very blunt terms, what is very concerning to me about Neil Gorsuch, more than any other factor, Neil Gorsuch is 49 years old. So anyone watching this right now, if they have children, they can just pretty much expect that over the life of their children, he will be on the Supreme Court. And the reason it's especially troubling, not only for all the reasons that our other guests laid out, but look throughout history. For people of color, LGBT people, women, anyone who has been a minority in America, the traditional path to justice has been through our court system, because sometimes the government has failed us. Sometimes our state legislatures have passed laws denying us our civil rights. Traditionally, we have turned to the courts for justice. And now we have a court that is tilting so sharply right, and the Department of Justice headed up by someone like Jeff Sessions, and that will have tremendous implications for the future. And meanwhile, whether it's immigration or Trump's overall agenda, most Americans do not support that. You know, most Americans, as we know, are not on board with this mass deportation strategy. They're not on board with what Trump's doing now. We know most Americans didn't vote for him, but they will be shaping our justice systems, and they're in the lives of millions of Americans.
That's what you're alluding to in terms of our fear needing to really mobilize those that have shared that view, Christian, is because we are, for the first time in a long time, and some of us first time in our lifetime, where you're worried about where the courts are going to go because they'll go up through the appeals courts to the Supreme Court, and now we don't know where that's going, particularly if it tilts one more seat. And unlike the last at least 8 years, the last decade, when we are dealing with police cases or discrimination cases, we can no longer say we're going to the Justice Department, which is your point, because we've all but been told that the door is closed for civil rights and discrimination and gender equality and LGBTQ rights in this Justice Department. And you've got to recalibrate your whole way of resistance now, because the federal government is no longer your way to try and balance states that do things that are in many ways unfair in our judgment.
That's right. And the court historically has been a forum of last resort for minority communities. I mean, the Supreme Court is where we got Brown versus Board of Education, and a place where we've seen transformative change when it comes to civil rights. We have cases pending across the country that may eventually come before the Supreme Court. At the end of the day, what's most important is that we push to hold public officials accountable, like the Attorney General, and that we bring that same pressure to bear on the U.S. Supreme Court as well to fairly carry out its obligation to ensure equal justice under law for all.
Thank you very much, Kristen Clark and Raul Reyes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.